wing tanks filled with high-test gas. You get down the runway at about after maybe 40 miles an hour. If you blew a tire, you're dead. You got cremated.
My guest at this time is Marty Jackson. He's a veteran of World War II with the U.S. Army Air Corps. Sir, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you.
Let's start with the very beginning. Where were you born and raised, and how did you join the service?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, on August 12, 1923. And I had an older sister and a younger sister. And my parents, of course. And you just want to continue?
Well,
okay. My mother was Catholic and my dad was Episcopalian. But when he married my mother, he promised we'd be raised in the Catholic Church. It was tough. And I went to Catholic grammar school, spent 8 years in the boys' school, and my sisters went to the Catholic girls' school. Presentation, and we had over 400 boys in the boys' school and well over 400 in the girls' school. And when you got to the 5th grade, you could get in the church choir. And only 25 boys in the church choir because that's how big the choir loft was. And I got in the choir in the 4th grade and stayed in the choir up until the 8th grade, and I was a boy soprano and I was very good. And then graduated from the Catholic grammar school, went to a public high school, Marshall High School, 5,500 students. And 90% of them were Jewish kids. And very first semester, I had to take a music class. So the music teacher made everyone stand up in the classroom and sing the scale. And I got up and sang the scale real loud, and everyone laughed, and he threw me out of the class. In fact, he was so mad he expelled me. Then I realized I'm going to have to do something for a living besides sing. Because my voice had changed from singing in the Easter time in about April to September. And I never knew it because I wasn't singing. That was it, the rude awakening. And I went through, I was taking college prep courses at the high school. And then at the end of my 3rd year of high school, I got a job as a bellhop in a big hotel in Chicago called the Morrison Hotel, which was the Democratic Party headquarters for the whole country. We had about 80 bellhops there. And I had to work 6 days a week from 5 in the evening to 2 in the morning. And I had to finish my 4th year of high school while I was working. I only had 1 day off a week, and it was real rough. But I couldn't quit that job because I wanted to get money to go to college. Because the time I was a little kid, my mother drilled and my dad would drill me, "You're going to go to college." You wonder why the Jewish people are very successful. That's what they do with their kids from the time they're small. You're going to college. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a lawyer. And that's where my folks were. And I was raised in a Jewish and Italian neighborhood in Chicago. And of course, the high school I went to, 90% Jewish. And made some dear friends there. And I continued working as a bellhop at the hotel. At that time, in a factory, a guy worked 5 1/2 days a week, 1/2 day Saturday. And he would make about $18 a week. If he had an extremely good job, he made $20 a week. He's a factory worker. As a bellhop, I was making about $35 a week, mostly tips. And it was a very fantastic hotel. And besides all the politicals I engaged with or contacted, it was the sports headquarters. You ever hear Jack Dempsey or Gene Tunney?
Sure.
They were heavyweight boxing champs. I knew both of them.
Great.
Waited on them. And Pat O'Brien,
sure.
Movie actor.
Yes.
Waited on him. And the Martha Ray.
Absolutely.
Waited on her. and numerous other people. And it was also the mafioso headquarters. Every evening, all the they didn't stay at the hotel there, but they would gather because that's where the action was. And all these capos would hang around there. All that, we got to know them real well.
They tip well?
And we called them the syndicate.
Did they tip well?
Oh yeah, if you did anything for them, but they at the hotel, so we never did much for them. But they were real friendly, we engaged in conversations with them and all that. They liked us. And then I graduated at grammar school in June '41. Pearl Harbor came that December. Imagine what happened to our graduating class, the boys, right? Anyway, when we had Pearl Harbor happening, I was going to a community college. There was about 1,000 students there. And there was about 40 boys that we got together. We went down to the Navy recruiting office, and we wanted to join the Navy Air Corps. None of us ever flown an airplane, but wanted to be pilots, you know, the glamour stuff. Anyway, the Navy gave us consent forms because we were minors until we were 21 those days. And the Navy wouldn't even talk to you until you had your parents' consent. So I went home with the consent form and I presented it to my dad, and he says, "I'm not signing that, period." I had no option. I had to keep working and going to school. But I lost all the zest for things because I wanted to go in the military.
But you convinced them. You convinced them eventually.
I convinced them almost a year later, October of following year of '42. Guy I was going to school with, Dave Radin, good friend of mine. We were in high school together, and he was going to go down and take the Army Air Corps exam. And he asked me to go with him. I said, "I can't," because my dad won't sign the consent form. He said, "The Army's different. They let you take all the tests, and if you pass everything, then you get the consent form." So I went with him. I had no trouble. I passed all the tests. It took several weeks to do all this. Then I presented it to my dad. He said, "I'm not signing that." And I had to argue with him. I said, "I'm going to be drafted, and I want to be in the infantry. I don't want to be in it. If I'm in a war, I want to fly airplanes." So finally he relented when I convinced him it was the Army Air Corps, not the Navy. He said, "Well, you won't be flying over water, so I'll sign it." I saw more war than any Navy guy ever saw. Because they go off the carriage, they only go for 3 hours.
Sure.
That's their range. And those P-47s with our wing tanks and all that, we'd go out for 7 hours. Longest mission I flew was 7 hours and 10 minutes over water. Anyway, so if he'd have known that, anyway, we would fly these long missions, and all my buddies do that, and we would come back from these long hauls over water, and they say, "Hey, Jackson, write your dad a letter and tell about the mission today." I said, "Oh yeah." Anyway, so I did enter flight training, and they when they called us up after we were sworn in, we had to wait several months, and they called us in, and there was 500 of us that were sent to Shepherd Field, Texas. And we were the very first of a new program they had. Usually they would take the guys, aviation cadet guys, and send them down to San Antonio for processing. They would get a physical and all the tests, mental tests, and agility tests, and all that, coordination stuff. And then you would go what they call, that was classification. And after a month of classification, you would go into pre-flight. You'd go 2 months of pre-flight, which was ground school and a lot of PT stuff. And at the end of 2 months of pre-flight, then you were assigned to whatever school you were going to, navigation or bombardier or pilot. And then you started your pilot training. And I ended up going into pilot training, and I had no trouble there. But when I was down at Shepherd Field for our first class, a basic training, 6 weeks, you know, with the rifle and all that, marching on a shooting range, just like a regular G.I. Joe, you know. At the end of our 6 weeks, we were going to ship out, and the sergeant shows up and says, "Hey, you guys unpack, you're quarantined for scarlet fever." Really? Yeah, and we were quarantined in barracks for one whole week because one of our roommates was in the hospital with scarlet fever. So when he gets out of the hospital, typical Army, we talk to him as we're ready to kill him. He says, I didn't have scarlet fever, I had a bad cold. The only bed they had left was in the scarlet fever ward. Army, huh? So anyway, so then after he gets back, and he survived, we didn't kill him. The sergeant shows up, okay, guys, pack up. We had 2 full duffel bags of clothes. We were marched across the field for 2 miles to another quad area, a barracks, and you had a bunch of 500 guys coming in from Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, all Southern boys. And we were dispersed through them. 2 guys in this barracks, 1 guy in here, 3 here, you know. And so we trained with these guys. They just got their uniforms. So we had 6 more weeks of basic training. And we said, we were all college kids. We said, how in the hell do you flunk basic training? But here we were. And we had to go. Only thing we didn't have to do was take the shots again. So anyway, and these guys from the South, they were KKK boys.
Oh, wow.
Oh. Coons, Kikes, and Catholics. They hated them. They didn't know any of them, but they hated them. That's how they were raised. And half of us were Catholic kids, and a great many of us were Jewish kids, and then we had Protestant kids. You know. It was 88 of us. And then we were dispersed among these guys, and they're like we're scum, you know. And we're arguing and fighting with them, not physically, but verbally. Well, many of these guys, Southern boys, became dear friends of ours because we stayed together and went through training. And they told us later, when we got to be friends, they were scared to death of us. Imagine? Because they saw all these gangster movies, and here we all talk like gangsters. And they word went out, don't mess with those guys from Chicago, they'll kill you. And luckily for us, then we had 4 guys that I was with in this one barracks. And one guy had been in the CCC, so he was a couple years older than us. And he had a split blade knife, you know.
Switchblade?
You know, pop open, you know. And you should see them throw that knife. You go to the center pole, that 4x pole, you boom, boom, boom. You know, all these rebels be looking at that thing and never saw a knife work like that. And then he told us, we thought the word went out. They'll slit your throat while you're sleeping.
Mr. Jackson, let's pause right there. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back on Veterans Chronicles.
Okay.
We are back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Marty Jackson, veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps, who served in the Pacific in World War II. And sir, it was September 1944 when you finally got to the Pacific Theater, correct?
Yes.
And then your main focus, from what I've researched, was over the Philippines. Is that also right?
Yes.
And talk about your responsibilities. What were you doing on a regular basis?
Well, to back up a bit, we got to overseas in September, and I was not assigned to an active unit. I was in the reserves there. And I did other things like fly convoy covers, search missions, and then I became a co-pilot on a B-25 for the colonel that was in charge of the base. And as I told everyone out there that the only thing I knew about twin-engine airplanes, that if you were up in the air, you lost one engine, you had enough power left to get to where the crash site was. That's all I knew about it. Anyway,
comforting.
So after I flew with the colonel for about 10 days or something like that, then I was involved in this other stuff, and suddenly one day, about over 2 weeks after I was there, the sergeant in charge of our fighter ops, called me and another guy up and sent us down to the transport ops. We get down there and we find out we're air crew on the C-47 transport. And he never flown a twin engine. And he said, well, you got B-25 time. You be the pilot. I said, yeah, I'll be the pilot. I'll fly it, but I want the throttles in my left hand, so I'll sit in the co-pilot seat, which I did. And when we went out there, we met the crew chief, you know, and we reported to the crew chief that we are your new air crew, and that we've never flown this type of airplane. And the crew chief looked at it, oh God, not again. They had such a shortage of personnel in the South Pacific. You were called upon to do anything. And so we get in there, and thank God I was comforted by the fact we're just carrying cargo in the transport plane, no people. And so he has to show us how to start the engine, how to taxi the airplane. And I get up to the runway, and I run up the engines and check them out, pull on the runway. I says, here we go. He screams at me to stop, stop. I stopped. And he said, you got to lock the tail wheel. We both turned around and looked at him. How the hell do you do that? We're going to fly. We didn't know how to lock the tail wheel. So he tells me, reach up under the instrument panel. You'll find the handle. Pull it straight back. I did. So off we go in the Wild Blue Honda. And he had his hands gripping our shoulders. Anyway, so off we go. And we flew up to Finschhafen, and we dumped the cargo, and then we got 10 grunts come on there, a squad, infantry, climb on board. And the seats and the transports run parallel to the fuselage, like for paratroopers to get it. And you could carry cargo. Mm-hmm. So you had a lot of room. So they put their equipment on the seats and lay down on the floor. Grunts always lay down to sleep every place. So we climb on board, we're walking over to our bodies, we finally get up in the cockpit with the crew chief. And I turned to my other pilot, I said, those stupid bastards, they don't know what danger they're in. So I took it off, and off we went, and we flew up to Hollandia, and they got off. And it was no trouble flying the plane at all, because we had 5,000-foot runways, which are pretty good. And I didn't try to make a nice landing by stalling it in, you know. I just flew it on the runway, put the main gear on the runway to chop everything off, because we stopped before the end of the runway. That's how I flew it, no problem. Later on, I got more sophisticated, you know, land a little slower, look real good like an airline pilot and all that. And so we were in NASAB to about the 1st of December, when 13 of us were verbally ordered to join the 58 Fighter Group. No written orders at all. They got us together, okay, you guys, you're going to join the 58 Fighter Group, and they are in transit from Newport Island in Dutch East Indies through Leyte, that's where they had the invasion, up to Mindoro. We're going into Mindoro Island. Catch up to them and join them. Okay. Of the 13 guys there, I was the last one to report in, and that was until January. The weather was so horrible, and we had baggage. The only transport we could rely on were C-47s or B-24s. We couldn't get in any other type of aircraft, so we had baggage. So I was the last guy to report in of the 13, and some of our guys got there, and, like about December 20th or something like that. On December 26th, the 58th Fighter Group had transited from Newport through Mordtai Island and the Halmaheras to the Mindoro. Now, 2 squadrons made it up there. The 3rd squadron, by December 26th, had not joined them. 3/10 was stuck on Mordtai Island because of bad weather and stuff. And they were just there a few days on Mindoro, and they were still working on a strip at Mindoro because the transport that was carrying all the asphalt for the runway and all the laundry equipment and all the water filter equipment had been kamikazed and sank. So they decided to just make a mud runway. Well, mud runway's great. If it rains, it's pretty slick. You slip and slide over the place, you know, wet mud, you know. And when it's dry, what do you got? Dust all over the place. So, anyway.
Marty, let's pause right there. We'll come back and do the final segment in our conversation with Marty Jackson, World War II veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps.
All right.
We are back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. We are joined by Marty Jackson, the U.S. Army Air Corps veteran of World War II, and he was just continuing his story on the airfields.
Okay. So my outfit is on Mindoro on December 26th. And on that date, the Japs sent a task force down to attack Mindoro, consisting of one heavy cruiser, a light cruiser, and 5 destroyers. And an aircraft carrier was supposed to join them. And the aircraft carrier got torpedoed and was sank. And the 58th on a runway they had, which had not been really finished yet, still being constructed, did not have any bombs at all. And the night was approaching, and they wanted to attack this task force. Well, they also had on another strip, the Guayra strip, they had a B-25 outfit and a P-38 outfit, and they had bombs. But they decided to hit them first with the 58 fighter group to strafe the task force, Jap task force, with 50 calibers. You know, we had 8 50s in the wing, quite a bit of firepower. And 50 caliber is a heck of a weapon, you know. You could penetrate a quarter-inch steel like nothing, which destroyers have. So they sent them out. They took off at night. They only had 31 planes serviceable at that time. And when preparing to take off and taxiing one of the planes had a problem and broke a wheel deal. So they took off with just 30. These no bombs, no wing tanks, no belly tanks, no nothing, except machine guns. And they went out there and they're looking for this Jap task force. And it's dark, moonless night. And they were able to find the task force by finding the phosphorescent wake in the water that the ships create when they... Now, interesting, afterwards, the Navy found out that if you traveled at less than 8 knots per hour, you didn't leave enough wake for them to detect. Over 8 knots an hour, you could pick up the wake of the ship. Isn't that something? That was not discovered by some Navy captain discovered it. He experimented. Stupid, huh?
Yeah, you didn't think of that.
That's the one that done before. Or even the Japs never did it. And the Japs were excellent seamen at night, far better than we were. They trained for night fighting. Anyway, but the our 47's 30 planes, they found the Jap task force, and they just strafed them. Now the colonel ordered them to just go like east to west, so you wouldn't run into each other. So they come around and no lights at all, and as soon as they'd fire on the Jap ships, they would return ack-ack. And they would use tracers on the ships. And eventually, the 58 finished strafing, shut our ammo off, and they were instructed, instead of coming back to Mindoro, to go down to Leyte, because they thought the Japs had Marines on the destroyers. And if they came back to the airfield, they'd either be shelled or the invasion, the Japs would get the planes. And only a couple planes returned to Mindoro because these guys knew they had not enough fuel left to get to Leyte. And so most of the planes tried to go to Leyte. Well, as it turned out, they found out that when it was all over and picked up these missing guys, of the 30 planes that went out, they only got 8 planes left. And they lost 5 guys. And as a result of that, they got the Presidential Unit Citation. And the group leader got the Distinguished Service Medal. The 2 squadron leaders got the Silver Star. And all the other pilots got the Distinguished Flying Cross. Most of them, 5 posthumously, And that was a big deal.
Sure.
That was the best thing they did in the war, But the follow-up to that, the 38s had bombs, B-25 had bombs. They sank the task force with the bombs. But they picked up survivors. They said the first group of fighter planes that hit them and strafed them knocked out all their ack-ack and shot out all their gun sighting mechanisms, so they couldn't shoot their gun accurately. How about that? So they did some good.
Yeah,
anyway.
Definitely.
Then I didn't join the outfit until January. This was over with. Get up to Mindoro. Okay. Mindoro had what they call wharf rats. Know what a wharf rat is? It's the biggest rat. It's the size of a jackrabbit. Real rat. Size of a jackrabbit. And cobras. Cobras all over the place. Rats all over the place. We figured out they had a lot of cobras because they had a good food supply.
Makes sense.
Anyway, but the worst part about Mindoro, they had a little red tick. Rocky Mountain fever, you've heard of that?
Sure.
It's called by a little red tick. You've seen little red
Yes.
ticks, haven't you?
Yes.
You can barely see them. Okay. Same thing on Mindoro Island, but it was a different strain. We had been inoculated for typhus, but this was a different strain altogether. We had over 90% mortality.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. So the medics were desperate. So you had the good news. They made you take your blouse, your trousers, and your socks, and you had to soak them in a GI soap solution. Let them dry out, then you wore them. And you had to tuck your pants cuff into your socks. Imagine how squishy your feet felt, but you had clean feet. But imagine jumping into a foxhole with cobras around.
Oof.
Without a
No.
light. You're looking at, every time you turn, you pick up anything. There's a cobra. I don't think any of us got bit, but boy, I'm telling you, we're shooting them all the time, taking our 45s and bang, blowing their heads off.
You didn't train for that, did you?
Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
So, one of the things, of course, that you're best known for is the missions you had the day before
Oh, yeah.
and the day after,
Okay.
the bombing of Nagasaki.
Yeah. We were on in Porak in Luzon, and we were ordered to move up to Okinawa. And boy, were we enthusiastic about that. Because we started singing around, we're Okinawa bound with all the kamikazes hanging around. We're fighter pilots, want to shoot down airplanes, right? Yeah. So they come to me and they say, you and Captain Foster are going to be on assignment to the 5th Fighter Command down at Clark Field. Really? For 2 weeks? So the guys went up to Okinawa, and Captain Foster and I, we went over to Clark Field and flew some stuff around for them and all that. So when our 2 weeks was up, the very end of our 2 weeks is the day they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And so the next day, Foster and I, we go out there and catch a plane, a B-24, up to Okinawa. And all the talk all over, everywhere, what's an A-bomb? Do they have B-bombs? Do they have C-bombs? Well, what the hell is an A-bomb? Nothing about it. It was a secret,
Sure.
So we get up to Okinawa, then join our outfit, and the next day, I'm part of a 16-ship formation squadron. 16 ships is the squadron of P-47. We're going up on a fighter sweep of Kyushu Island. That means you fly around the island, you shoot up anything that moves, all right?
Right.
You're right on the treetops. Yeah, nothing, with 850 calibers, nothing moves. Believe it. So we fly around the island, but as we approach, we go up on the, we came in about 10 feet off the water, Void Akat. We come up there and get up there, and we get up on the rooftop of Nagasaki. Well, I'm looking around. Big factory town, big industrial town, filled with the corrugated buildings. The only thing wrong with the buildings, they need a little paint. Anyway, but we took care of that paint job. But anyway, so, and I am furious. I am furious. What have the stupid B-24s been doing? They haven't been bombing this stupid place. Just think all these factories, what they turn out, they're war goods, right?
Sure.
We didn't know it. But they had put 8 cities in Japan off limits. No bombing. Because they knew they were going to use the A-bomb. And these 8 cities were selected targets for the A-bomb. It didn't want any prior existing damage, so when they dropped the bomb, they had a real full assessment of the damage from the A-bomb, right?
Right.
So no prior damage. We didn't know that. That was a secret. So anyway, we get back, and the next day, our 310th Squadron comes back, and the guys there say, hey, they must have dropped a bomb on Kyushu somewhere, because the whole sky lit up. We said, you want to get them? Sure, that night they announced the bomb. They hit Nagasaki. So the very next morning, I am a squadron leader, all 16 ships, assigned to fly a sweep around Kyushu. So you know where I head, right up to Nagasaki. And I'm not worried about it. I came in about 5,000 feet, you know, sit there so I have a good view, and I looked down and I couldn't believe this is a city. Nothing. And you know, the A-bomb blew up in the air, and it came down like a pancake. So the streets and sidewalks were wet because it had apparently rained that morning or something. Not a speck of dust on them. Perfectly clean. And the rubble, where the buildings were, was made up like a mortar block or bricks.
Sure.
Nothing combustible, all gone. And the only thing you saw upright was steel poles straight up, or chimneys. You can understand the chimney way it's built?
Right.
They're already compressed, right? That's all you saw. And we couldn't believe it. And I'm the squadron leader. So we're talking to each other, you know. We're down there about 1,000 feet, looking at it real close, and yakking each other. Gee, isn't that odd? Man, you ever seen anything? No, we never seen it. I've been doing all 16 of them, yakking back and forth. So I'm the leader, and I have a mission to fly. So after about 20 minutes, I'm getting concerned for my fuel, right? So I said, okay, guys, we gotta go. We gotta go, guys. In fact, I often done, if we weren't low on fuel, we'd still be flying around there looking at it. Yeah, but I went around and went back, you know. Then, then we were talking about the invasion of Japan. Because, you know, Okinawa was very, very terrific battle.
Yes.
We lost an awful lot of men on Okinawa. And so did the Japs. And we figured that invading the home island of Japan would be horrible. And luckily, they finally decided to surrender. And the way they arranged the surrender, that the Japs could keep their emperor. If they hadn't done that, we would have had invaded. But MacArthur was smart enough. Let them keep their emperor and we wouldn't have any trouble. Because the people love their emperor, they die for him.
Right.
Right? So that happened. Great. So what happens after that? The war's over. So we flew combat missions after that until September 2nd, when they signed on the Missouri. Right?
Yes.
So anything after September 1st didn't count as combat missions anymore. So I just had a few of those.
In your service to America, What are you most proud of?
I just did what I was told. It was amazing. Here you're very vulnerable to getting killed. We lost half our guys.
Mm-hmm.
You're very vulnerable to getting killed, not only from the enemy, but operationally. You're taken off from these runways with napalm bombs or wing tanks filled with high-test gas. You get down the runway at about after maybe 40 miles an hour. If you blew a tire, you're dead. You got cremated. You had no control over that. It's very scary. Really?
You just never knew.
Oh, yeah. Every once in a while, a guy blow a tire, and poor Charlie.
Wow.
It happened. Once in a while, they would get the guy, he'd have back banners, and he'd hang around for a couple of days, then die. Huh. We were all aware of the fact that we might get killed, because we saw enough of guys getting killed. You lost half your guys, you know, you're subject to,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And I don't think any of us really were that afraid of dying as much as how you were going to die. Getting cremated is pretty slow burn, right?
Sure.
Imagine. Give you an example. We dropped a lot of what they call napalm. That's jelly gasoline. And we flew mainly close support for our ground troops. And we would work through the ground controllers. They're on the ground. And they would tell us where to mark the targets and all that, how to drop it. Because they're dive bombing, you're using 1,000-pound bombs. And napalm, you're on treetops. And they would mark the target. They would put colored pot marks out there for where their front lines ended. So you drop your bombs beyond that. And when we dropped napalm, we would fly maybe about 30 yards apart, something like that. At most 50 yards apart. Have two bombs, one on each wing, 165 gallons. You're on the treetop. You drop the bombs in unison. The leader would duck his head and release the bombs. He did the same thing. So you'd have 8 napalm go off. And they, big fire, right? They'd be spreading. Then we'd have 4 planes coming back with our 4 and picking up the flame where our left off. We would run for like a quarter of a mile. No one survived that. No one. In fact, our controllers would tell us that the Japs would see us come over and they would blow their whistles, air raid. Yeah, non-COs, and non-commissioned officers, and the officer blew with them. And the Jap troops would look up and see what it was. They saw bombs on us. They said, you wouldn't hear anything. They saw tanks on us. They knew it was napalm. Oh, you know, what are you? They have such an uproar. These guys know they're going to get cremated. And the Jap suits are screaming and yelling all over the place. I don't blame them. I would too. That's the end of it, right?
It is.
Wicked weapon.